Welcome to Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times, presented by Worth Wealth Management, a weekly conversation with area leaders about how to persevere during uncertain times. Now here's your host, Gary Shorman.
Welcome to Forward Ever. Our guest today is Steve Smethers, and we do a lot of things on Forward Ever. I'm not sure we've ever talked about taking a train ride in Kansas. But to do that, talking to J. Stephen Smethers, who's the retired director of the A.Q. Miller School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Kansas State. He's also a Hall of Famer. He's a rock star in Kansas broadcasting. He's a Hall of Famer. But right now he's in the railroad. So Steve, time out right now. You retired from the School of Journalism.
Mm-hmm.
You had free time all over the place. What's the story with you working with the railroad?
Well, the Abilene and Smoky Valley Railroad is a big community-wide effort. And I had a friend who was the head of the Convention and Visitors Bureau in Abilene. And she said, we were talking one day at dinner, and she said, she found out that I was interested in trains. And she said, would you like to come over and volunteer for our railroad? I said, you mean you can? She said, yeah. And so I've been a car host in the past. And as I have retired, it's been a nice thing to slide into to spend more of my time with this project. I grew up loving trains. I grew up by the main line of the Katy Railroad when I was a kid. And so I've always had this wonderful fascination for the railroad industry. I never dreamed that I would be working to help operate trains. And so in retirement, I write grants for the railroad. I am doing more work on developing projects. I'm helping book dinner trains. I do a lot of things that normally I would never thought I would have ever done. You know, these are all things that are fun and things I love to do.
So explain what happens at the Abilene and Smoky Valley Railroad. What's the venue there?
Okay, first of all, just a brief note of history. We operate on an old piece of Rock Island track. And the Rock Island, when they came through Kansas, they had the main line that went through from St. Joseph down into southwestern Kansas, leaving the state at Liberal, going through the Oklahoma and Texas panhandle, and ending up in Santa Rosa, New Mexico. The Rock Island in 1886, they had already established a reputation as the farmer's friend. And so they realized that they needed to get trains into Salina. They wanted to compete with four other railroads to haul flour from the grist mills in Salina, and of course to haul grain. So they built the Harrington to Salina subdivision, and that's what we operate on. And it's a 49-mile stretch of track that at one time was a huge asset to the Rock Island because it allowed them to go into Salina as they made this otherwise a diagonal cut across the state. So that's the background of the railroad. Now, the railroad went bankrupt in 1980. That was the Rock Island. The Katy Railroad came in and operated that for about 8 years. Finally, their assets were eventually absorbed by the Union Pacific. Union Pacific was getting ready to tear up the line, and people in Abilene wanted to be able to preserve the Rock Island's legacy and how it had built Dickinson County. And they approached the Union Pacific with the proposal to acquire all of the track between Abilene and the town of Woodbine in southeastern Dickinson County. And so that's what happened. That happened in 1993. And in 1994, the railroad ran its first excursion trains. And so in that time, we've built a reputation as kind of a museum on wheels because we use antique railroad cars. All of the cars and the engines on our railroad have worked for other railroads. We are also a historical thing. We have an educational mission. When people ride our trains, we recount the history of our railroad and how the railroad's built, certainly central Kansas, but all the state of Kansas and really the entire country. And finally, it's a recreational thing too. It's a fun thing to do. We have been very, very busy during the COVID years and here in the post-COVID years because it's something fun to do. It's a way to take a staycation in this time of high gas prices. It's a lot of fun to do. And so many families come on board our train and so many old timers who remember the heyday of railroads.
Now, let me get this straight. Can you actually run a train, Steve? I know you run a control board at a radio station, but I mean, those are challenging, say the least, pieces of equipment. They're huge, they're old, so you have to keep them restored. All the moving parts and big parts that go with that. How does that stay up to date?
Well, first of all, I'm not an engineer. You can train to be an engineer. We have, I think, 45 volunteers, Gary, and only 2 of them have had previous railroad experience. Everybody else has learned this by coming in and being a part of our volunteer crew. And so we put our people through safety training. And then there's just a lot of training that people do as conductors. Then they finally move into being engineers if they want to do that. I like running my mouth too much, and so I'm a better car host. I'm one of those tour guides that recounts the history of the train and so on. But we have a lot of people who do this, and people from varied backgrounds. This is my favorite story. We used to have a gentleman from Wilson, Kansas, who was a Methodist minister. He had retired the pulpit, but he still preached on Sundays. And he became an engineer for us. And we of course have people from all these different backgrounds. One of our leading background people is a guy by the name of Steve Smethers, who is a retired medical doctor in Abilene. And all of us fascinated with trains. So that's the first criteria. We were doing a train one day where the Methodist minister was our engineer. Dr. Schwarting was our conductor. And I said, so I gave the backgrounds to the people riding the train that day. I said, that ought to make you feel safe. We have a Methodist minister and we have a doctor on the train today. And what I didn't tell them was Dr. Schwarting had also been the coroner of Dickinson County when he was in the medical profession.
We'll leave that part to later. Leave that part to later.
Yeah, exactly.
So when somebody buys a ticket, Steve, what do they get to experience? I know there's several different options, but what do they get to experience?
We do most of our real traffic with passengers on our excursion trains. And our excursion train is an hour and 45-minute trip between Abilene and the little town of Enterprise, which is about 5.5 miles east. We go to Enterprise, we let our passengers off the train, and in Enterprise, we actually have a replica of a grist mill. Enterprise was built as a milling city. And so we actually have some pieces of the old mill in the replica that we have made there. We grind our flour, we have flour for sale and things like that. So we put on this wonderful demonstration of grinding wheat using a stone. And so we do that, we turn our engine around. One of the things about our railroad, Gary, that is so cool, it's not like any other type of excursion railroad I've ridden, is the fact that we let people come up, take a tour of the cab. They can take a tour of the caboose. They can talk to our staff. We're all teachers in that regard. And we actually have a special fee where I think it's $15 above the regular ticket price, where people can actually ride in the cab on the way to Enterprise or on the way back from Enterprise to Abilene. People can also ride in our caboose, ride up in the cupola of the caboose, which is a really cool ride. And so we are very much a hands-on application. We call ourselves a living history museum because that's exactly what we are. Every car is a museum exhibit. All of the cars worked for other railroads in the past. And so if you really are into that kind of history, there's plenty of that. We have one passenger car that's made out of wood. and was made for the Katy Railroad in 1902. And you don't find very many of those anywhere anymore, especially still being used to haul passengers. We have another car that's a luxury coach from the 1940s for the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad. And both of these cars have seen so many miles. Our engines have seen a lot of miles too. And so most of our rides are diesel, powered by diesel. We have a old 1945 diesel locomotive that was given to us by the Hutchinson Northern Railroad. And down in Hutchinson, that's the rail track that goes out to the salt mines and brings salt back in to be distributed to the other railroads.
Steve, I'm glad you touched on that because this is not cheap to get done, even to get them to that point. You just don't pick up a train and put it on a trailer and move it around. It takes effort to do that. So I'm glad you touched on that. And were all of your cars donated?
All of our cars have been donated to us. And just in various ways, we've acquired all of this rolling stock. We have cars sitting on the West Abilene rail yard that we don't even use right now, but they've all been given to us. And so they're all awaiting restoration and for us to come up with new uses for them. The interesting thing about our engine is that it's been in operation. It was going to be scrapped if the Hutchinson Northern Railroad couldn't get rid of it. And in 1993, they offered the engine to us. It was brought up here by rail. Our people got a hold of it and worked on it, and it's been powering our trains for the last 28 years. The prize of our fleet, though, Gary, is our Santa Fe 3415 steam locomotive. That engine was retired by the Santa Fe Railroad in 1953, and it was given to the city of Abilene in 1945, and it was put on display in Eisenhower Park in the West Central part of the city. And there probably isn't a kid who grew up in Abilene who hasn't played on that engine, getting up and ringing the bell and pretending they're conductor and so on. Well, one day as our railroad was being formed, Joe Minnick and Fred Schmidt, the founders of the railroad, they went by the park and Joe looks at Fred and he said, I wonder if that old engine could be made to run again. And so they called in an expert from the College of Engineering here at K-State. And the guy said, well, I've got good news and bad news. The engine is in great shape and it could run again. The bad news is it's a steam locomotive and you don't exactly go to Napa Auto Supply to buy your parts. You have to make them all. And so, but it just so happened that Joe had been a machinist in his professional life and he knew every machinist in North Central Kansas. And I always tell this story. I don't know that I would know anything about working on a steam locomotive, but if you're a machinist, that is a badge. I mean, that is a special thing to be able to tell your grandkids that you did. I worked on a steam locomotive at one time. So get this, it normally costs about $2.5 million to renovate a steam locomotive. In Abilene, they did it for $283,000. And that was due to a community-wide fund, but it was also due to some grants they got from the Kansas Department of Commerce and the Kansas Department of Transportation. They started working on the engine in 2006, and by 2010, that thing was ready, and we use it on all of our holiday weekends. We have Labor Day coming up. We're going to be running trains on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday of Labor Day weekend. And it is a wonderful, wonderful thing. It is the only operating steam locomotive in 4 states. And it is it's one of 3 Santa Fe steam locomotives still in operation.
That's such a good story, Steve, because we talk about on this program, leading in challenging times, to see a community get together and have that sort of, I'll call it Kansas ingenuity. That's what it is, figuring out a way to take, we don't have $2.5 million, but we can take and work and be smart and do that. It's a great story about Kansas. And I'm excited to see how this continue. I'm going to take a break in a second and talk about something new you're working on, and it's the Iron Horse Trail. I want to talk about that. Before we go from this subject, though, if somebody wants to ride on the train and participate, whether it be over Labor Day or the rest of the year when you guys are doing the rides, how do they find out about when it runs, and then buy tickets?
We have our website, which is www.asvrr.org. There you'll be able to see a schedule of our regular excursions, our dinner trains, or any of our special charters that we do. And so you can buy your tickets right there online. And by the way, we do have dinner trains also coming up over Labor Day weekend. And we have 2 of them. And so we're very, very excited to keep the dinner train schedule in operation really up through the end of the year.
What's in a dinner train? What's for dinner?
Well, we're catered by restaurants and caterers in Abilene and in the area. We have we're very excited to welcome the Brookville Hotel back to our catering family. They've just opened as Kansas legends with the Munson Steakhouse in Junction City. We have Lucinda's Catering of Abilene. We have
several others. I know there's several that are there, and that's all online because you can go online and find that and make that happen.
You can find
so it's
out what the deal is.
it's ASVRR. What's that the acronym for?
Abilene and Smoky Valley Railroad.
Abilene, Smoky, and take the first letter off each one of those, type org, and you can get there. Steve, I'm going to take a break. I want to come back and talk about the Iron Horse Trail, which is another new thing that you guys are working on over there. Stay tuned with us. Our guest today is Steve Smethers, former professor and director of the A.Q. Miller School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Kansas State, but now he's one of the sharpest guys on railroad in Kansas. We'll be back with more after this.
The most successful investors are those that can keep their emotions in check and take a longer-term view at what portfolios will be worth 3 to 5 years down the road. I'd say that's the most important in determining what investor outcomes are. Market corrections will continue in the future. We've seen many of them over the years, only to see equity prices rise higher, and that'll be the case in the future.
Worth Wealth Management, enhancing lives and strengthening families.
Steve, we talked about what exactly went on and what's going on with the Smoky Hill. Smoky, it's going to be the Abilene and Smoky Valley Railroad. Got that right. We talked about what's going on there. But there's some new things you guys are working on. You're just not stopping with having a really cool train and experience with that. Tell us a little bit about the Iron Horse Trail and what you're working on there.
The Iron Horse Trail is actually a product of COVID. People in Abilene were looking to be able to get exercise and to get out, out in the open rather than being confined spaces. That was the original discussion that started it. There is an organization that is a community organization here, and the Iron Horse Trail was something that originated outside of the railroad, but they approached the railroad about being able to use the railroad right-of-way to be able to walk, run, or bike into Enterprise by using a special trail that would be built on the south part of the railroad right-of-way. Gary, it's standard with all railroads that the right-of-way goes 50 feet either side of the center of the track. So it means that we own a lot of real estate that we don't even use. And so on the south side of the track, we have set aside that portion to be able to be able to handle walkers and bikers and so on. We dedicated that on the 2nd of August. It was dedicated in memory of Mary Jane Ord and her husband Orville. Mary Jane was the manager of the Abilene Smoky Valley Railroad for 6 years, for 26 years.
Mm-hmm.
Can we stop? I'm sorry. We can't stop. Okay. My cat can you hear my cat?
I didn't know what was going on.
Okay.
But we could start at the break. Let's come back at the break and we'll try. I'll see if I can get my guys to figure out how to do this.
Okay, while you're doing that, let me go get Snow and put her in another room.
I'm gonna pause this right here.
Okay,
Hold
yeah.
on. Okay, we're gonna record the second half of this program coming down in 3, 2, 1. Welcome back to Forward Ever with our guest, Steve Smethers. And Steve, we talked to him in the first half of the program about the Abilene and Smoky Valley Railroad and the cool things going on there. But you have something new in the works that you're working on right now, just dedicated not long ago. It's called the Iron Horse Trail. What's that about?
You know, it's a project really that kind of developed out of COVID-19. And what the trail is a effort to be able to have a biking, walking, and running trail from Abilene into Enterprise. And during the COVID era, of course, we were worried about being in enclosed spaces. This trail actually is going to be a nice, safe place for people to walk. There's a road that goes between Abilene and Enterprise, and out on this road, there are people out riding their bikes and walking all the time. Naturally, you're worried about safety, right? When you use a public thoroughfare. And so people wanted to be able to have some kind of a venue where they could ride their bikes and so on. Well, in Abilene, the Abilene and Smoky Valley Railroad runs through the south part of the city. We originate in the old Rock Island Depot, and we go all the way to Enterprise. We're right on the south side of the Eisenhower Presidential Complex in Abilene. And all railroads operate with the standard that the railroad right-of-way exists 50 yards either side of the center of the track. So it means that the railroad owns some real estate on either side of the track. Well, what has been proposed and what has happened in Abilene is a community organization that is working with the Community Foundation of Dickinson County, the Abilene and Smoky Valley Railroad, and some other benefactors, working to take the south side of the right-of-way and make that extend all the way into Enterprise, which means crossing the river. They're going to have to build a small bridge to go across the river, which is the third part of the grant that is still outstanding in that project. But the first part of the trail was dedicated on the 2nd of August in honor of Mary Jane Ord. She and her late husband were the original managers of the Abilene and Smoky Valley Railroad, and Mary Jane retired last year at age 85. She retired last year as manager after 26 years as manager of the railroad. She and Orville did so much for that railroad and for the entire south part of Abilene. They were volunteers with the county museum. They were volunteers with Old Abilene Town and some of the other features that are down there. They decided, the community decided it was very benefiting to name the first leg of the trail after Mary Jane. So it is called the Mary Jane Ord Trail. That is the first leg of the trail that goes from the Dickinson County Heritage Center Museum property. That's about 2 blocks east of the Rock Island Depot. And it goes all the way to Jeep Road. And Jeep Road is about 2 miles east of Abilene. It's a major north-south paved road that goes through Dickinson County. The next leg of the trail will take us to the Smoky Hill River Bridge, and then we'll have the final leg of the trail, which will be the bridge going on into the Rock Island stopping point in Enterprise. So there are 3 sections of this trail. 150 feet is done, 150 yards, I should say, is done. But already people are going out and walking that 150 yards just to be able to say they patronize the trail and they can't wait until it gets done.
So, Steve, let's just wrap up here, because this isn't done. I know it takes volunteers. So I know you're looking for volunteers. You also take donations to help make this work, and you do that through your local group. Is there a foundation that makes this all happen?
Well, we have the Dickinson County Foundation, which has been very generous to us. We have we are getting ready to organize a foundation for the railroad itself. That's still in the works. Right now, we get donations and we operate off of the fares that we make from our excursion trains and through our dinner trains. Now, the Iron Horse Trail has actually been funded by grants and pledges. There's only one final grant that has yet to come through, but 3/4 of that trail is already paid for, and we're just waiting for it to be constructed. And so we have pots. We have pots for contributions of all kinds of things: refurbishing our rail cars, refurbishing our track, refurbishing our steam locomotive. We're getting ready for its 15-year kind of maintenance, I guess.
Tune-up. After 15 years, we all need a tune-up.
We
right?
all need a tune-up. That's right. And so we have a lot of different things, to contribute to. And so anybody who would like to donate, we actually have a PayPal thing set up on our website. We also accept contributions by mail at the depot in Abilene. And so that's kind of what we have going on.
Well, Steve, thanks for joining me today, because if you go to that website and it's ASVRR, Abilene Smoky Valley Railroad, if you put those letters in .org, you'll get to a great website. I just pulled it up here as we were talking, and there's all sorts of things. You can find out even about the Coffee and Cinnamon Roll Express. How good is that?
Oh, that is wonderful. Amanda's Bakery and Bistro in Abilene, Gary. Get this, they make the biggest, gooeyest cinnamon rolls possible. And the rolls are made from the flour from our grist mill in Enterprise.
Well, how cool is that? So you can sign up. You can find out about all these things. Steve, thanks for your work. You can also find out how to donate here, and appreciate your leadership in helping this continue to grow. Hope you have a chance, if you're out there listening. If you like trains, you see them go by. Sometimes they're just annoying because you have to wait. But when you look at Kansas history, being able to haul grain, produce, livestock across our state, it was so essential to the growth of our state back really in our state history. Thanks for your help in preserving that, Steve.
You betcha, Gary.
Our guest today is Steve Smethers, volunteer and extraordinary broadcaster as well. He's been our guest here on Forward Ever. Thanks for listening. The program is brought to you by Worth Wealth Management, where you can live with confidence. I'm Gary Shorman.
Thanks for joining us for Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times, presented by Worth Wealth Management. Join us right here next week for another episode with host Gary Shorman. Until then, remember to move forward ever, backward never.